We're going to be talking about metaphors in Chinese, the nature of metaphors in Chinese. So, Aman, go ahead.
So since this is the opening to the open conversation, I'm going to take advantage of it because this passage gives a perfect opportunity, because Sun Tzu offers a metaphor right at the very end: water crashing from a height, pent up into an abyss thousands of feet below. Really powerful metaphor. It's a beautiful image. It's evocative. And that's not something you think of when you think of a military strategy text, but it is necessary to capture your audience's attention, to get them to start to think in terms that you want them to think. And I've discussed many times throughout this session how the landscape and the method of warfare, what had been undergoing a sea change of this time, from chariot formal ritualized warfare into fielded conscripted soldiers in ranks and ranks and ranks. These are very different animals. And so when you're speaking to this audience, you want to speak their language. Many people in here in the discussion mentioned some very Taoistic ideas, and I love turning Taoist into an adjective, even though it's not a word, but I think it should be. But I want to disabuse us of thinking of this strictly in Taoist terms, because Taoism will come after this. Sun Tzu precedes Taoism. All of the Chinese landscape draw from the same, what I've called proto-Taoism in other texts, but in this context, what you can think of as sort of the pan-Chinese cornucopia of universal ideas. This would be similar. The analogy I draw is you can use the term spirit or soul in the Western world. Regardless of religious affiliation or background, almost all of us have some conception of that. It's a pan-Western cultural concept that we all share. In the same way, there are pan-Asian concepts that are shared, especially East Asian. And so yin-yang, which many of you are familiar with, mostly from Taoism, is one of these ideas. It predates Taoism and exists long before then. So many of these metaphors would be wrapped in those ideas. Many of these allegories would allude to sort of a yin-yang balance because it appeals to the Chinese mindset. So this pent-up dam bursting waters thousands of feet below, there's both a very yin and yang, action and water and chasm depths and great heights. You can see the yang and yin in that. But there are other subtler metaphors just lousy in this fourth book. Another comparison I just drew up a list as we were talking, was the comparison of stone and water. One of these is considered more yin, stone, versus the water, more yang. I know that sounds backwards, but yin means more substantial and yang is more fluid and active. Also, the idea of the Tao, which is where he ends this, is a much more yin idea than the idea of fa, method or law or direction. They balance each other as well. Heaven and earth, defend and attack. Even what Jason was talking about, these ideas of Xing and Shi, which are used as a single dual syllabic term to mean situation or concept or circumstance, form their own yin-yang pairing of Xing being the more yin, what we just read, and what we're going to read next week, Shi, the more yang. Not that it is active, but it is just about to be active. It is that pent-up dam with the first crack in the wall. All of that energy about to explode. I thought of many sort of common examples in the modern time, but out of all of these, and as much as I want to talk about Lennox Lewis knocking out Mike Tyson in 8 rounds in 2002, because that was a watershed moment in boxing where you saw yin defeat yang. I'd rather point out Patton and Marshall from World War II, two lions in Western US military history. But look at the aftermath. Patton stormed the beach at Normandy. Marshall was in charge of the the Pacific Theater. And then at the end of the war, what happened? We switched their places. Marshall wound up going and instituting the Marshall Plan for Western Europe. We haven't had until a year and a month ago a land battle break out in Western Europe since then. That's almost 4 generations. That's pretty impressive longevity, long-term strategy. Patton went to Japan and China, and then we had Korea, and then we had Vietnam, and we had nothing like a Marshall Plan there that worked as well. And so that sort of storm, that, you know, blood and guts Patton Yang may have been great for the end of battle, but when it came to securing peace, you needed a more yin Marshall. You couldn't have Patton do that. Yeah, I have many other analogies. I want to give everybody else time to speak. I will throw more thoughts out if the time becomes available, but thank you all, and I want to hear more of your thoughts.
Aman, I am just so intrigued by your comments on the metaphor in Chinese. You know, we've been diving deeply into the concept of metaphors, you know, works of Julian Jaynes, Owen Barfield, just many things. We are looking at metaphors everywhere, in poetry, in the Bible. But I think with the point that you're making, that because of the pictograms or logograms, the metaphor is built at the word level. There is no metaphor in ABC, in the sense that you can kind of stretch and do it, but it's not really there. You know, unless you put the whole sequence together, you don't get anything, you know, whereas each of the characters, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I said this at a former meetup long ago, but another formula, GOOD, good. Abstract, Plato writes an entire dialogue on it because we have no concrete idea of this. Mm-hmm. The word good in Chinese, hao, is really simple. It's a mother and child.
Oh,
that's
wow.
it.
Wow.
And because it is that simple, you don't get a Plato arguing about what is the good. Every Chinese person points and says, that's good. Right there, that's it. And if you think about what that does to the development of thought, we have been seeking essential truisms that are as formulaic as our words and as concrete and empirical as the Pythagorean theorem. Chinese have not been doing that. They have been taking those concepts that we argued over for granted as a universal. Everyone agrees on what's good, but then the arguments become about very different things, about how do you formalize something as chaotic as warfare, or something as unpredictable as political science. And so you get the art of war, you get Confucianism as these sort of put out arguments of this is how we can do this successfully. And, you know, the really patient Chinese person would say, well, we've only had about 300 years, you know, Confucianism's verdict still isn't in. But for anyone who's been watching modern history, 3,000 years or 2,000 years, not such a bad run. You could probably call that at least a partial win.
So let me step back. I'll tell you about where, how much time do you have, Aman?
Until I get yelled at from the other room. So
okay, that's fine. I hope it's so. Folks, I'm going to have a conversation with Aman on what we've been doing on metaphors and what he sees as connection between metaphors and this, and then we will open it up for questions at that point. Okay, so we're going to,
and then I'll go. So I can't.
Yes, exactly.
Suck
so
all the oxygen.
Yeah, so just go ahead and let's go ahead and do this. And what we'll do is we'll do discussion later on. But I want to hear Amon's take on it. See, what I've realized, and this is actually, it's just what happens is that most of the words that we use are corpses. They actually were alive at one point, and the metaphors made them alive. And to see where they came from, how they arose. Take the word like spirit, for example, right? The wind from outside coming in and then being spoken and shaping everything. It's very deep of how these words came to be. So metaphors are deeply built into words, words were once metaphors that are, people have lost that. So that is true even in the West, of this connection between metaphors. But what I want to do is I want to look at how exactly it works in, your observations about how it works in the Chinese language and what we can learn from Chinese. Go ahead.
So I'll give you my best thumbnail take, and
Yes.
not a dissertation. I will get pushback even having said that Chinese is a pictographic metaphoric language, because there are those who are very clear in saying, no, some of these radicals don't necessarily connote a metaphor. They're just a sound, they're just a tone, they're just a pronunciation indicator. But at root, a great deal of the Chinese language was pictographic, was stick figures turned into less and less complicated things to write, until they got abstracted to the point where many people wouldn't look at the character for fish and say that is how you write fish. But when you see the progression, kind of like the evolution, the chart of evolution, it does make a sense of sorts. As far as what this does culturally, it does a few things. The Ocean's holding some. Oh, I think he held up fish, which was great. I can't see it that well, but that's okay. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis that I'm talking about is this idea about language affecting thought. And the most extreme version of this is hard determination. The other one is soft influence. I tend to lean towards soft influence. I don't think it makes a hard determination, but it does give us the building blocks with how we can describe our ideas, how we can communicate our ideas. And the only reason Chinese is a language is because of its written language. Verbally, it would be looked at and you would say that is 80 separate languages, because they are more dissimilar one another than Norwegian and Swedish are from each other. Those are actually could be called a language in different dialects, but they have national borders and call them languages. Chinese do not have national borders, therefore it's dialects, but they have a written language everyone shares those metaphors. That doesn't translate to everyone thinks the good is mother and son, even though Ocean, that's what he was holding up. Thank you. Sorry, I can't see it really well. But it doesn't mean every Chinese person absolutely thinks that is the, pinnacle of good. But it does mean that there's a shared understanding that at least is a starting point for the discussion. When it comes to then expanding on metaphor, it's kind of hard when you already start with a metaphoric language to then work in metaphor in a more creative way that will pick up every little nuance. We got a little of this in the Tao Te Ching, where I pointed to a passage where I said, he's talking about life flourishing. And when you look at it written, you actually can literally see plants pop up all over the text, because he's drawing what he's speaking, but it's written into the language in a way that is invisible to us. There's some of that here in The Art of War, a lot less. Like everything, it's a lot more concrete. So the metaphors are more concrete. They don't try and work them in subtly. If Sun Tzu was one thing, it was not subtle. So even his metaphors are, here's the metaphor. It's like this, full stop. Maybe with some editing over time, and I think it was David talked about the development of the text over time, yeah, anything goes through enough hands, it probably got a little more nuance, a little more, oh, we need to put this here and put this here, make sure that these match, use this term, not that term. And one of the things that's lost in this is that if something gets rubbed out or a piece of soot gets rubbed onto the paper just wrong, suddenly we don't just have a, I can't make out that word. It could be, oh, that's a totally different word with a totally different meaning. There are instances of this in classic Chinese scholarship. I don't know if that entirely answers
Sure.
your question, but
Let me approach it. This is beautiful. Let me approach it from another angle. We've been studying Tao Te Ching, Bhagavad Gita, and Gospel of John, and we're looking at how metaphors work in each of them. So let's just talk about metaphors. How metaphors in Tao Te Ching?
So I'm actually going to refer to, I think it was Mark who was reading the Slingerland translation of the Analects when we were doing those. Mm-hmm. And Professor Slingerland is very, very big on this idea of metaphor as a universalizer, sort of something that can usurp the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. In other words, just because this is the way, and Kevin's doing a wonderful job in the chat, giving the etymology of some words where you get the word for tian, heaven, sky, celestial, from person, from big. And you add these things together, these images together, one person that's big, that's tian, the sky, all under heaven. It is meant to sort of hit you right in the gut. But the metaphors of things like, what is one person united under the sky is what's all under heaven, is a metaphor that we can grasp as well. Even if we don't necessarily know it from the language, somebody explains it to us, we go, oh, I get that image. Or if we talk about cooked ding or butchered ding in the Zhuangzi, which I'm going into it, but he's hacking and hitting this giant ox with his shoulder. And as he's describing, thwack, slice, swipe, that metaphor of a blade moving through is something so visceral that we can grasp it even if we don't grasp the language metaphors. And Slingerland's argument is this is what unites a great deal of these schools of thought, are these chains of metaphor that otherwise would be overlooked. Because not once in the Zhuangzi does he ever actually say the words Wu Wei. And so people have said, well, that doesn't make him a Taoist. Yeah, but read that butchered ding metaphor, read about the man who made the bell, or there are so many allusions to effortless action, doing without great effort, Wu Wei, that he argues, yeah, this is absolutely a Taoist text, and you'd have to be an idiot not to recognize the metaphor in it that is expressing Wu Wei. In the same way, the Art of War is not a Taoist text, but they share so much common ground and come from such a same fertile, sort of soil of the time, that things that make it into the Art of War, make it into the Tao Te Ching, make it into the Zhuangzi, images of water, images of defense, images of, hewing to more yin ideas as opposed to always being too yang. Not because they were Orthodox Taoists, but because these are universally good ideas. They just work. And so you should stick with them because, every Achilles out there will only be sung about so long before his end is, foreseeable, way off. We know Achilles is going to die.
Wonderful.
I guess that's the best way I could kind of
sure
tie a bow around that.
So if I can ask you one more question, kind of now stepping back and looking at English and metaphors in English. look at, I mean, the great thing is that you're very well read in both English and Chinese. So, so look at the way in which metaphors are used in English at their best. I mean, forget about, at their best. And then
I'm thinking of the Jabberwocky.
yes, no, that's a great example. And how does that work? And is there any comparison that you can make between the way in which metaphors are working in Chinese?
I'll give you an author who and this was actually why I think Taoistic is a great adjective, because there are so many things when we get to this idea that these are universalisms, not necessarily culturally precious ideas. There are then opportunities to look at other things and say, wow, that feels very Taoistic, without feeling like we're trying to culturally appropriate or something like that. If you go to Hawaii and watch someone dance the hula, hula is very Taoistic. So is surfing. That doesn't mean there were, Taoist, I can't even think of what you would call them. Nobody was proselytizing Taoism on the islands of Hawaii, but but if you're looking for a good author who I think does an excellent job, who would have been, in my opinion, a great Taoist poet if he had been born in China, James, what's his name? Oh God, it just escaped me. Civil rights era, James, oh God, somebody help me.
Somebody go ahead and type
Baldwin?
Baldwin, thank you. Oh, yes. Oh, that moment. Yes, James Baldwin. If you read his writing, he is brilliant with his use of metaphor in his writing, to the point you don't know that it's working on you until you go back and have somebody point it out to you. There's a short story he wrote called Sonny Gets the Blues, which, if nobody's read it before, I highly recommend it. The very last image in that is somebody under a spotlight in a jazz bar with a drink that is milk and scotch that's vibrating on the piano as the person's playing, and he refers to it as the very cup of trembling. There is so much in that image, just layers upon layers upon layers upon layers of metaphor and illusion in that image, that the first time I read it, I was like, okay, I mean, I'm not a biblical scholar. I do know my biblical literature a bit, but even when I heard the cup of trembling, I was like, it's ringing a bell. And then you go and look it up and you realize this is actually an allusion to some masterstroke. His writing is a masterclass in the use of metaphor and illusion. And I recommend Sonny Gets the Blues to anyone who hasn't read it, just to get a taste of it. And there's so much yin yang. I mean, scotch and milk makes me want to retch at the thought of it, but something so wholesome and something so awful, glowing white under this black light in this dark room under a light. I mean, the layer upon layer upon layer of sort of paired metaphor that I don't think he even had the terms yin yang for, but as a Taoist looking at it, I go, oh my God, there's so much yin yang just in this imagery. It's genius. Yeah, he would be one of the exemplars I would go to. And excellent. I'm gonna get out of here and let you guys have a chat.
Talk about it.
I'm not monopolizing.
Okay, Aman, thank you so much. And folks, welcome. Thank you so much for your patience. I really needed to ask Aman these questions because I want to feed that into everything that we are doing on metaphors. But now, please, I would love to hear all your thoughts. We'll start with David. David, go ahead.
Thanks. That was, yeah, it's a shame he had to leave, because it'd be nice to bounce around here, the things that come out of what we're going to say. I look at metaphor as, in the ways you've talked about in previous meetings too, that it allows us to change levels of what we're talking about in a language as we speak. So it's a self-aware kind of fluidity that we can speak about what we're all talking about. We can also speak at another level all of a sudden, bring that level in, let it go if it's had its function, or draw attention to changing levels, right? Now in Western language, we began with pictographs. The symbol for water became the sound, and that became the M, and that's the word in the Semitic languages. Mayim, mayim is water, and that's the same word for the heavens is related to that, Shemayim. So we began in a pictographic way. And Eastern languages, which have this, the good depicted as a mother-child symbol, he talked about the sort of digitization of language. I think what we're talking about here is the abstraction, fragmenting language into pure sound, and then just having those little bits, which you can, with very few symbols, produce any pronounced oral language. So that abstraction, from at least the Western logical point of view, this is what I'm coming from, it divorces you from the tether of the pictures and all the concreteness. Now you give up the concreteness, but now you can work at a level that is devoid of the tether, the anchor that might hold you down when you're dealing with things that aren't strictly concrete. That could be a big advantage, because the pictograph preconceives an abstract term. You always have to think of the mother child, and maybe that isn't actually what good is. It can actually sometimes not be a good. You know, the mother child can be conflicted, and so what exactly you're getting at might be obscured by the fact that you have to constantly express it with that symbol. But if the symbols have no specific, maybe MOM, it just means whatever. Upside down means wow, you know, whatever. So it's, you know, that these terms, not self-consciously, are intrinsically containing something you can't get rid of, you can't abstract out of, because the symbol is that fixed symbol with that meaning. So I think there's a bad logic intrinsic in being bound to a pictographic symbol. At least that's my Western tilt on it. And so the Western culture, we've been stuck with certain metaphors the same way Eastern culture has.
Can I do one thing?
Go ahead.
That was such a brilliant point. I wanted to address. I want to make a comment on that, and then please continue after that. Is that okay? All right.
Sure.
So this is really fascinating, because what you're saying is that, you know, metaphors are there in the alphabetic language, as well as the logogrammic, logographic language, like Chinese or a pictographic language. But what happens in pictographic language, the concrete itself is kind of tied to the abstract, and it is tied at the hip. Now, there is some advantage of it, because you never lose connection with the concrete. It remains kind of grounded, but it remains grounded in one way. Now, if you look at metaphors, right, metaphors are basically something that you're familiar with being used to point to something that you're less familiar with. Now, the way in which it works in English is that, let's say you're trying to point to consciousness, right? So the way you point to it is by using metaphors. You use many different metaphors. Now, because each of them are not tied to concretes, the words, so you can use like a tree metaphor. It's like a tree this way. It is like a searchlight this way. It is like a machine this way. And you're using all these multiple metaphors in order to tease out the complexity of the elephant, if you will. You know, it's like elephant, and you're saying, oh, it's like this, and it's like this, and it's like this, and you can add it all up. So you can use like a symphony of metaphors that are all capturing various aspects of the thing that you are looking at. And so certainly English does that all the time. Like, for example, we're going to be studying metaphors in Gospel of John. You have like ton of metaphors. And each of them is actually throwing light. And them all together, what it is saying about the complex topic of what divinity is, for example, or what word is, it's just enormously complex. And it's all done through metaphors, but many metaphors like that. So and that's again a Western, I'm coming, that's again very similar to the Indian mind too. Indian mind also does the same thing. Because it is not tied to pictograms. So it's a beautiful point. Please go on, sir.
Yeah, you just made me think of, maybe this is objectionable, but the way I look at language, I'm afraid there is no non-metaphorical language at all.
Yeah.
You're using languages like, okay, so let's understand the scaffolding is entirely built out of itself somehow.
I completely agree with that, by the way. I
Okay.
completely agree with that. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so thanks. Okay. The only thing I was going to add was an example. He was talking about how Eastern symbols have pervaded the culture and have been shared in such a way that there's been a communality, and historically civilization has used those. I was going to say Western culture has some of the similar stuff. We got very much into the metaphor of the universe as God's clock, and the clockwork, the material of it makes it deterministic. It's physics, it's according to rules, it's totally predictable, it has regularity. So the clock making this theory leads, from enlightenment scientific revolution to our theory and physics of everything will be described by our, mathematical, and the end of God, it's part of that whole thing. So the clockwork with the author who must have made it, it becomes the destruction of the metaphor of God in a certain way in the Western culture. So I think we've experienced that at ARC too.
Absolutely. I just want to say one thing about it. David, great observations as always. The person that I learn most from on this topic is Julian Jaynes. And he says he looks at kind of theories of consciousness over time. Whatever was popular at that time, everything was, that was compared to. So there was, once it was a clockwork, once it was a blank slate. Then it was, stimulus response thing. It's just like animals, just like this. So they're all metaphors and they're all trying to do that, except you get in trouble when you fix yourself on the metaphor and you mistake the metaphor for the thing that you are metaphor for, what it is. So the idea of just having multiple perspectives, multiple metaphors, and being open to everything is great. Okay, thank you so much.
One little addendum, because you sparked this, which is the pictographs, which at first I said maybe they're too contained because they're so concrete. Yeah, I have to admit, etymology reveals that, as your author taught us, as we speak, we're using old dead metaphors in a way. When we're inspired, we're breathing in the spirit. We're, we're enthused. We're full of Deus. Enthused means we're full of God, right? So we're carrying around the pictographs in our etymological structure as we speak anyway, and we really haven't escaped that totally.
No, exactly. And what happens is that that's why I called words most people use as corpses, because actually there is a living thing in there. When you actually look at a word and take it apart, there was actually a living thing in there. And what's that?
The living metaphor was alive. That's what we have. Back to Shakespeare.
Yeah.
New word. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Folks, I would love to hear from all of you. So just any thoughts? Paul, Kevin, and Joe next. Paul.
Yeah, in terms of these words, I want to propose that if you look back through history, there was not language. First, there was just spoken word. And even people like Jesus wasn't even literate. And then we got into a big world of language, and it was also great to communicate ideas, because not everyone could just talk to each other unless you were right next to the person. But my point is, now the whole thing about Chinese versus English, I'm being a little radical just to make my point, is less important because we no longer have as big an emphasis on language only. We, for instance, right here in this room, I'm not going to turn my video on and then I'm going to turn it on, but I breathed a sigh of relief. And because you heard me say, I breathed a sigh of relief, you didn't have to just look at some corpse word, because the modern kid does nothing but watch videos. So now I'll turn on my video. Let's roll all this up into a thought. Let's make a tetrahedron out of it. So we're doing everything in the modern world beyond language, using all the five senses. And language, and they say when you're talking this way, is only, what, 20% of the communication. 80% is all these other things. So all the life is now coming. We don't need the pictographs of China. It's coming from the five senses of person-to-person interaction. So that's my point.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. So the way in which I see people who do language talk about this is that all of life actions is the input to language, where you take all of that in. So there is one way of getting, it's amazing. You know, life itself is amazing. And so you see somebody do something like breathe a sigh of relief. They don't even have to say that this, you know, that I breathe a sigh of relief. You can see it, and you can even, you almost react to it with your mirror neurons directly. What language does is that it takes life and says, what is this like? What is this like? And connects it up to a million things and starts to combine it to produce a whole range of new things. It can be done in multiple ways. Language is one of the most powerful ways that I know of to do that. You can do it visually. Like if you are at the scale of Leonardo da Vinci, you can do that visually. If you are at the scale of Beethoven, you can do it in music. You can take the little sounds of people breathing sigh of relief versus people being suddenly tense. All that breath can go into music to produce stuff. But it is all about taking these bits of concrete things and imbuing them with more meaning and connecting them with other things and building something which is far more integrated, far more applicable to far more things than the immediate thing that it came from. So that that's the process of kind of taking in things. I love Louis Sullivan's term here of saying life began to break in upon him, and a continuous breaking in from the outside and breaking out from the inside was to shape his destiny. So life is wonderful and people are wonderful. There's all kinds of stuff going on, incredible stuff around. But so you have to breathe that in, and you have to be open to saying that, look, I don't have everything. Okay, Tao is much larger than I am. And so I have to be open to Tao and take all of that in, but then speak, put it, do your own combination of it and speak in a Taoist way, in the sense that in accordance with the Tao, combining things in your own way, speak, and then listen to other consciousnesses doing that. And what it produces as a result of it is something much, 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 much greater, which is civilization. So it's like you're starting with nature, you're starting with the current state of civilization, and you're trying to build something. Each person doing that, and each person sharing that. So that's how I think about it. So wonderful. Thank you, Paul. Next up is going to be Kevin. Paul, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I just want to, just quickly about the Beethoven angle. I want to be a little different in what I'm trying to say, which is that we each, as normal, not Beethovens, are metaphorically expressing ourselves through our way of talking and our way of using our hands and our way of being in all five senses automatically, kind of like David said, we have pictographic, even though, metaphor is built into us. We don't have to be Beethoven. We use it in every moment we're speaking, in a sense. And when we're visually presenting ourselves and orally, that's all. Thank you.
No, absolutely. I mean, we use metaphors all the time. The difference in somebody like Beethoven versus most people is that they invent metaphors. It's the difference between Shakespeare, who kind of puts together new terms, which create what Owen Barfield calls this felt transformation of consciousness. So most people, what they do is that they reuse things that are there, and they will do innovation at a very modest level. A great artist like Shakespeare or Beethoven or Leonardo is able to take that, and they are able to put a new combination together, which anybody can look at and say, oh, wow, I had never thought of that. So that experience of felt change of consciousness that Owen Barfield talks about, so there is a level of what we do with metaphors, which is different. And it's worth saying that, look, I can do only so much with metaphors right now, and maybe I can do a little bit better. That's how I think of it. I'm mostly, I can only babble. When I look at some of these people, I realize that I can only babble. And there is a lot more that each of us can do. So I think of it that way. And I don't think of it as a shameful thing that we can't be Beethoven right now. I can't speak very well. It's okay. You do what you can, and then you keep improving. I think that is a much better position to be in. And oddly, when you look at people like Beethoven or people like Newton, their approach is exactly the same. Newton doesn't say, oh, how great I am that I figured out. He says in his own words, I don't know how other people might see me, but as for myself, I seem to have been a kid on the seashore who has just discovered just some shells more prettier than the others, whereas the entire ocean lies unexplored. So thank you, Paul. Next up is Kevin, Joe, and Ocean. Kevin.
Yes, thank you. I just quick follow-up, Paul. It's our knowledge and wisdom is not a replacement. We keep upgrade. It's about accumulation. I give you a quick example. Today I watched one video about the paper. The paper some years ago produced in Chinese. The right book, they last longer. However, 100 years ago in China, because imported from Western production quick, they are last time, like 50 years, they see rusty and stain. Anyway, that's side story. For me, it's today I should emphasize the Tian, sky or heaven. That's initially when we learned Dao, I little bit have different opinion about that. Because if you use the heaven, today we meet a problem. The chapter 4.2, right? They're going to night heaven, 9 heaven, 9 earths. This doesn't make sense. Then he uses that nine layer, right? It's like that's original mean. It's a sky. It was physics, right? Sky, we got multiple layer as general. It's they code in stratosphere, mesosphere, the thermosphere, and exosphere. Even for Earth, we got 4. We live after crust, which we live on. Also another mantle, and after core and solid core. So that's matches obviously from the 9 Earths. That's mean got a layer. If in the Buddhism, they got, if you go to the devil, right? Go to 18 layer, multiply 9, 18. That's in Chinese, got a 地狱 code. And on top, yeah, sky. That, by the way, the What's the biggest number of a single digit? It's 9. It makes sense. Also, we call the king 295. It's top. And if you say linear number, and then you -9, that's near Earth. Then yin and yang, that's the also it's everything you should going to connect to the Tao, right? Tao is yin and yang. And for the metaphor in English, my understand, we need each language. I think they have some root, suffix, or prefix. Each word have etymology, makes sense. Look at what's from Greek or Old Indian and the Sanskrit. So those have some meaning. That's why you want to see. Maybe that's based on my own knowledge. In Chinese, each word have different meaning. That's even the language, the word itself, the meaning change in modern days still makes sense. This surprised me. We still can get something from modern day. Even origin meaning is changed. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. So the point that I wanted to make here is that each language and each person uses a system of expression. So it's not just one particular thing, because then you're looking at it in a broken up way. It's like the whole. So consider Dao De Jing. Okay, now I can't read Chinese and I don't know much about this, but I truly love Dao De Jing. And if you look at how metaphors work there, I was talking about how they work in the Western context. The way, see, what happens is that in each culture, they use, or each artist or each culture actually has developed a way of using metaphors. And the beautiful thing is that actually they are accessible to us if we do enough work and not look at them through just our metaphors. So take Dao De Jing, right? Look at how it marshals all of nature, everything that you can observe in nature and in small, kind of very simple human interaction, and converts it and uses all of it as metaphor to describe the Tao. It starts by saying, Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao, but then it goes on to use names. It's a Jing, it's a book. It uses words. And it does this magnificent job of creating all of these metaphors to show you, to kind of point you to the Tao, so that you will get some sense of it. You can never get the Tao. Tao is what it is. But it helps you. It genuinely helps you through this magnificent combination of metaphors, so that even somebody like me who doesn't know the Chinese culture can get a sense of that deep idea of the Tao. And as one of the most brilliant points Amon made, just while talking, by the way, was that there is he was calling it the proto-Taoist idea, or kind of like a mother idea, which is at the foundation of the Chinese way of thinking, because it seeps into all of Chinese thought. And that is Tao made, the implicit Tao, if you will, that actually kind of permeates all of the thoughts. So that's what I want to say. So, and the thing is that the reason I love doing these meetups on Chinese philosophy or Indian philosophy is that it allows us to actually commune with a different set of metaphors and different ways of using metaphors, and hopefully pick up something from that. Thank you, Kevin. Next up is Joe.
Yeah, this has been really fascinating. The thing I loved about Chinese metaphors in general is that it's really kind of helped me understand, like understanding the Tao, it uses words, but honestly, you have a better understanding of very deep concepts by the metaphors it uses, and why words in and of themselves are not necessarily, you don't need to name everything, you don't need to categorize everything, that very deep concepts can be communicated, things about how you should run a country, how you should behave in the world, all these things are being communicated through metaphors. And they're not necessarily labeling it, and saying it's this. And so, I think what metaphors do, is it allows cultures to understand one another better. I mean, once you start to understand a culture, like what their how they actually arrived at a particular metaphor, what their logic is behind it, and what the message is behind it, you start to understand the culture itself. In some ways, metaphors are limited in a way, in the sense that they can be cultural specific. And if you don't know what they're talking about, it can, cause some confusion. But if you understand the metaphor, then you understand the culture much deeper. And I think that's one of the most powerful things that I've kind of learned over this as well. And again, it helps. It takes things that are extremely complex and allows you to connect the dots. So I think about the metaphor meetup that we had with the Bible, Tao Te Ching, and Bhagavad Gita. And we saw some of the commonalities that existed across all of those. And that was done through metaphor. And it gave, me as personally, but also I think most people would agree, a much deeper understanding of how people thought about all four of those metaphors that you had used, and why they were used in the context that they were. So you have an understanding of the philosophy that's being espoused itself. How the Tao looks at water, how the Bible looks at water, and how the Bhagavad Gita looked at water. They're similar, but they're different. But you have a better understanding overall of what the philosophy is saying. For me, it helps communicate. And again, if we're reading ancient text, I mean, to me, the Tao is the easiest one to really grasp what it's, capture what it's saying, because it is just communicating mostly through metaphors, very short verses, and poetry almost. So, and there are, it is important to know that, we can misuse metaphors in certain circumstances too. And when they can go, not necessarily work, but that's mostly, I'm thinking in terms of something in the Western context for that. But anyway, those are some of my thoughts anyway.
Thank you, Joe. This point about that we can learn from other cultures, I think it's profoundly true, and it is just tremendously worthwhile, but it requires a lot of work. And that's why, I really appreciate what Aman is doing, what Jason is doing, what Gary is doing, what Yogeshwar did, because they're actually doing two things. One is that they're actually communing deeply with the text itself. And then they're trying to communicate to us. Like what Jason is doing is that he's trying to communicate the deepest Chinese ideas to a Western audience. Aman is trying to do the same thing. He's coming from the Western world without a base in the Chinese culture, trying to understand the Chinese culture and explaining it to a Western audience. The other part I want to say is that, the way in which these metaphors work is that the more you work on them, because a metaphor, the word metaphor in Greek means transfer. You're transferring something from one thing to another. You knew something about water and you're transferring it to mind, for example. You have to flow, it has to be a smooth flow. You can see the light very clearly and you're trying to transfer the brightness to something in here. So you're always doing transfer. And when you work with metaphors and you're trying to actually move metaphors between cultures, I experienced this when I work with Marathi and English. When you're doing the transfer, you actually learn a lot more because you have to get this set of metaphors and translate it into another set of metaphors while never losing what was being said by the first metaphors and figuring out a completely new set of metaphors to get at what was being said. It is not a mechanical translation. It is getting the spirit, the word is actually pointing to the spirit of what is being pointed to. So you need another word in another language, another pointer to point to the same thing. So it's, thank you, Joe. Please go on. You had more.
Just one comment. I mean, one of the things that I've also found interesting is just how the metaphors communicate the Tao and how the art of war actually is like the practical almost application, but you see elements of the Tao throughout the entire work. Elements of the use of nature, elements of leadership, elements of being self-aware. You see these deep concepts being communicated through the Tao, but then they actually have a way of manifesting themselves in the art of war in a very, how to even run a country actually is very much, captured in the Tao. So all of these things give you concepts that you can then turn into actions. And so I think that that's one of the most powerful things that I've actually walking away from reading The Art of War and Confucius as well. But is that understanding how metaphors can influence like actions in the world in a very concrete way. Like you see both of them. We saw it tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Folks, go ahead and type exclamation. We would love to hear from anybody on anything. Ocean, go ahead. What do you think about metaphors?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I hope you can read it. Maybe it's too dark here, but this is.
You'll need to hold it closer to the camera. Yes, we can see it now.
Okay, this is the word for good. Yeah. And this is mother and son. And so I really wish and our Aaron would stay there because I had a question for maybe I should ask him next time. So I grew up with reading the Chinese characters and stuff. So to me, there's a slight difference in the word good, Dio, and mother and son. So maybe he had different words in mind. So I wanted and when you mention about William James, I think that William James, one of the most remarkable statement is that he said, our daily consciousness is just one of many consciousness we do have, though most people are not aware of it. Most people live in just a regular consciousness. And if you do a deep meditation or take LSD or taking mushrooms, you start to access to different type of deeper consciousness, and you can through Taoist meditation contemplating about heaven, which is this heaven, through metaphors, So I'm glad you mentioned about William James, and there's a parallel between William James saying and Taoism. But again, I wish Aaron was still there. Maybe somebody can help him. But still, to me, the essence of art of war is how you will
Let
not
me
be
do
defeated.
Ocean, let me do one thing.
Yeah.
Can you go ahead and ask the question that you have? Maybe Kevin may be able to answer it. What's your question?
Oh, okay. So I still don't more the art of war is more like to me like a winning through deception, calculation, more like to me, honestly, more like a close to like a idea of Machiavelli, whereas the Lao Tzu is like a more deep into meditation, William James, different type of consciousness and going to the deeper of the consciousness. Whereas to me still art of war is like in the real world, not so much about the spiritual world, but in the real world you will not be defeated. How to win the actual war and you versus your actual physical enemy. So I still don't see a parallel between
Sure.
essence of Taoism and essence of art
Sure.
of war.
Okay. Ocean, I can try to answer it. I don't know
Yeah.
Art of War at all, and I know Tao a little bit. Okay, but I can try to answer it. Okay. I'll tell you what I see. Okay. Let me go ahead and make the answer, and then would love to hear from you. Or if anybody else wants to add to it, they're welcome to do that. The way I see it, see Tao, as I understand it, is simply what is. Full acceptance of what is, of nature itself, and resting your mind in that, coming back to that root all the time. Anything that you come up with, any ideas, you always come back. You come back to nature, and you have that kind of attitude towards the humility, towards nature, almost like a child, ready to throw away everything else that impresses other people and just says what is. Okay, it's a very simple kind of an approach to life. It's all about saying yes to what is. That's how I understand the Tao. Now, when I read The Art of War for the first time, and I'm very, very new to it, the thing that struck me is this reality orientedness. It is not about kind of saying, okay, I'm going to impress this. It's not about chivalry. How will other people think? It's all about just see what things are. So that's one thing, kind of that reality orientedness, which is quite similar. The second thing that I see is the entire strategy seems to be based, for example, the final few, I think it was the second last paragraph, second last set of readings that we did, was all about saying, where I made the comment that, this is very Taoist, because it's all about saying that accept reality, accept who you are, what your situation is, just ground yourself in that. And that is going to be the source of your strengths for doing anything. I see that in, reflected in Tai Chi. And then, so part of it is yourself and also the other person. Don't have this kind of mental blocks of he's a bad guy, therefore, and all kinds of misconceptions, but try to see who he is, what his strengths are, what his weaknesses are. And then don't be in a hurry to do kind of, okay, I have to do this. Otherwise, what will other people think? They will think I'm a coward or anything. No. Just try to see the winning condition, given your nature, given nature of everything else, and then achieve that. Now, that's where I see, and that seems to be the deepest strategy. And then on the top of that, deception is only tactical as best as I can see. The entire strategy is very much of saying, move with the Tao, practice the Wu Wei, and then this one. So I'm going to give a chance for other people to answer that same question, and then I'll come back to you, Ocean, and you can see whether any of these answers make sense to you. Let's go with Joe, followed by David. Joe. So Joe, the question is, do you see Taoism to be very different from Art of War? Art of War being very different, or you see kind of the connections between them?
I see the connections between them, but the beauty is it can be connections between peace and tranquility, and it can be connections made between war. And that's the beauty of it. Like the idea that it communicates very deep ideas that are almost, I'm not going to go so far as they're, kind of universal, but if you think about the idea of what a leader is in the Tao, and if you think about what a leader is with Sun Tzu, they're very, very similar in nature. And then also there are elements of even deception in the Tao. It talks about in one particular passage, like where a leader is essentially a leader is inept. I forget the passage because it's in the 40s. I forget. Appears as inept, but they're actually very capable. But there are elements in there that you can actually pull and see, even where they talk about not necessarily revealing yourself. I have to find the exact passage, but also I think that there are other things. I mean, again, just the mere use of nature. It can be used as a way to defend yourself, or in understanding terrain and understanding water. And then it can be used as a way of, going with the flow of life as well. So
let me make one more point, and then I'm going to ask David for his comments. Perhaps the confusion here, Ocean, is that there are two ways of looking at this. One is that you can look at kind of the foundational ideas. So whatever I have been saying, whatever Joe has been saying, is about the foundational ideas. So foundational ideas of Taoism and foundational ideas of Art of War, and what is the commonality between them. The second way of looking at it, and maybe you're looking at it that way, is saying, how is it being practiced? So suppose you're a Taoist, what do you do? Suppose you're studying Art of War, what do you do? What are the most kind of common applications of it? And there, I think you're right. Like most people who are studying Art of War, many of them study it for competitive purposes. And most people who are studying Taoism, they are studying it for meditation, for peace of mind. But those are kind of the ways of using these ideas. The idea of what are the common ideas underlying these things, fundamental premises, I think that is a separate question than how are they typically used. Let's go to David and then back to Ocean. David.
Right. Yeah, I'm not so much able, of course, to answer, but I'm interested very much in this question. I just want to put in terms of what I see, when we're reading The Art of War, it's more than applicable to war. It's not just about fighting. It's about expressing of any volition and how to act. It's how to overcome anything, right? You want to proceed in any endeavor without destroying what you have established and be able to overcome the challenges you're going to have. So you have to be aware, but some of these strategies are especially focused on dealing with the conscious other, so that your strategies entail understanding them as they are looking at you and what you're seeing in them. So I think The Art of War is talking about, we can be read in a broad way. What I don't know, and what I'd like to hear maybe Shrikant, everyone else, is to draw the distinctions and contrasts and clarify what is the difference of a leader as depicted in Tao. And the leader here has a clear objective, isn't passive to nature. but uses passivity because this is about getting your objective. This is about how to get your action realized, the realization of your will, the expression of your volition. That's what this book is about. Maybe it's also about changing what you're desiring. You know, in the end, if you want to desire this and you can accomplish that, making that choice. But so what is the other book saying about leadership? That's what I want to know.
Sure. A great observations, David. So, so firstly, I don't know Art of War, and I don't know Tao Te Ching that well. But the point that you're making. So, first thing is that from whatever I've read, these people are, both of these folks are masters. Okay, I mean, the way they understand their subject is so much deeper than what I do. Okay, and this is even far, you know, Lao Tzu is at a much higher level, I think, than Sun Tzu, because he's kind of at a metaphysical level. It's just really, I mean, I've never seen anything like that. It is truly magnificent work. Now, Sun Tzu, I mean, I think you put your finger on the thing where he has focused on more, and that is interaction between two consciousnesses, right? Which is not the primary, you know, which is, you know, Lao Tzu doesn't focus on that much. He focuses mostly on nature and your own consciousness and your relationship to it. So that, and what I expect is that, you know, as I said, you know, because I don't know much, I know that there is a lot more in Sun Tzu than what I can see. And I also know that it appears that Sun Tzu has developed that dance between two consciousnesses in a far more elaborate way than Lao Tzu ever wanted to do, at least in Tao Te Ching.
You could say that doing that is actually limiting your scope in a way, because he's not also incorporating the other question of, when I'm not confronting consciousness, but the mere physical world, what is it, you know, my entire, you know, conception and all the goals I'll set. This is not just a tactical question.
Yeah, absolutely. But the interesting thing is that both these people are so amazing that Sun Tzu's understanding of the Tao is so much better than mine. Okay, forget about the other. And Lao Tzu's understanding of how to interact with other consciousness is far better than mine. Okay, so it's like, so it's difficult to actually map these people where I stand. So so that's what I would say. Now let's go back to Ocean. And Ocean, I don't know whether any of this has been useful to you.
Oh, very useful. Thank you, everybody, for their information. That, you know, I can appreciate everybody. You know, Joe's talked about how, your consciousness shouldn't be clouded by that I would say, with longing.
Ocean,
So,
let me interrupt you for a second. You are driving. Are you, just please be careful if you're
Oh,
driving.
sure. I always drive. Yeah. So I really appreciate, and Joe, I know exactly what you're talking about. The true, according to Tao, which I totally agree, the greatest, the Lord is somebody the herd, common people would not recognize, just being nothing, and the common people are happy. The worst one is the guy who's like a Kim Jong-un, very oppressive. It's the worst type of word. But the best way is that common people would not recognize, how powerful the king is. So yeah, I know exactly the passage you're talking about. I mean, I've read the Tao Te Ching hundreds of times, and I really appreciate everybody's pouring information. But as I said, I am a practical guy, so I used a life example. I said a few years ago, I used to regularly go meditate with a real Taoist master, meditation, deep meditation. And this master just radiates unconditional love, just so deep, compassionate, just radiates love, right? So just like a melting in front of his presence. And I can never imagine he would ever leading the military to defeat the war against. I mean, he would melt everybody's consciousness into love, and to me, a true master of art wars, like people like Napoleon, even when he later defeated, had many defeats, but or Bismarck, a German chancellor, Bismarck, or the Mao Zedong.
Yeah.
They are the true master of this kind of calculation, deception, and never put yourself in a position to be vulnerable and always win the defeatable wars. Very clever, foreseeing things like Bismarck, Mao Zedong, Napoleon, and many others. So I cannot reconcile like the Taoist master who radiates deep unconditional love, melts everybody's soul into love, to people like Mao Zedong or ruthless figures who master the art of war. I mean, I can't. Yeah. So
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Great question, Ocean. Evanik, you've been very patient. You're next.
Thank you. I just wanted to talk about metaphors in general.
Please.
And the thing I think about is Negro spirituals, right? Because in Negro spirituals, what they did was they used metaphors to help them get to the Underground Railroad and make their way north. And they used certain words and phrases to indicate where slave owners were trying to hunt them down. And so I just think of that as another aspect of looking at metaphors as a way to communicate between each other without having the other person know. And it's not directly linked to the art of war, but I think it kind of is similar in that it's a strategy, especially when talking about tonight, talking about when your enemy is insurmountable. You can't beat them with might. That's not going to happen. How do you beat them? You wait for that opportunity, and you also strategize, I think, and you figure out when's the best time, when is your enemy vulnerable, and then you figure that out. And I was just thinking that went to the conversation, so just wanted to bring that up.
Wonderful. Thank you, Evanik. So folks, let me tell you about what we are doing with metaphors. Okay, we are going full blast into metaphors from many different angles. We've been looking at metaphors in a sense. We're looking at like the deepest use of metaphors. We're looking at Tao Te Ching, Bhagavad Gita, and the Gospel of John. Their metaphors are being used to talk about the foundational concepts of what is the world, who are you, what should you do, what is proper relationship with other people. That's what all of these works are about. They're fundamental philosophical works. They were the first attempts of people to make sense of our world. So they are metaphors at the highest level, because what you're trying to point to is so awesome, so amazing. We have done really good amount of work on all these three, and I think I want to build on it. We've also looked at people who really understand metaphors really well. Julian Jaynes, Owen Barfield, Lakoff, just Walter Ong, many people, okay? But I want to go further. So on one hand, I want to look at other works who have the same kind of a power. It doesn't have to be the same level. It has to be at least within an order of magnitude of that. And I found 2 people so far who meet that, and I'm looking for more people who are so the aim is that they have to be doing something of the order of magnitude of what these 3 works are aiming at. Okay, but it can be 10 times lower, that's fine, but that's what they have to be trying to do. And they should have done a pretty good job at it. So the first person I'm going to look at is Khalil Gibran and the Prophet. It's a book of poetry. I think it's the third most popular book of poetry after Bible and Shakespeare. And it's incredibly deep, and incredibly beautiful. It's very short. You can read it in probably a couple of hours. You can listen to it. It's available on YouTube. You can listen to it in 1 hour, 45 minutes. So we're going to do meetups on that. I've currently scheduled 2 meetups. And I invite you, and the approach that we use is that we are trying to commune with the work. We're trying to understand what it is and what is the mind of the person and what is he saying. So just experience it and talk about it. We'll do some reading, and that we're going to do tomorrow, Wednesday, and Friday. So I've scheduled these 2. The other person I'm thinking of is William Blake. But I'm open to other people. So I'm looking for great poetry, which causes what Owen Barfield calls this felt transformation of consciousness. I want works which are large enough to express a whole worldview. So not just a single poem, but large enough, but still manageable. And if you have any recommendations, please feel free to say, who would meet at that level. I mean, it doesn't have to be at the beauty of Tao Te Ching. It's hard to get something like that, or Gita, or Gospel of John, but it must register as something. And I think certainly, I've not read enough of William Blake to be sure about this, but I've read the Prophet a few times, and certainly has something. So I invite you to join, because what it does is that this is, we've talked about metaphors, and we've talked about metaphors using multiple metaphors as a way of triangulating. It's like multiple searchlights on the same thing. They're all talking about the same thing. They're talking about what is this world, what is the nature of nature, and what is the nature of your consciousness, and what should you be doing, and what's going on with other people, and how do we interact with each other well, something like that. So that's the quest. And what we're doing in the same line, we've been doing meetups on the Gospel of John. So on this Thursday, I'm going to try something very ambitious. I'm going to go through the Gospel of John in 21 metaphors. So I've chosen only 1 metaphor per chapter, and step in same metaphor twice. Yes. So I've chosen only 1 metaphor per chapter, and I'm going to try to show what metaphors do in Gospel of John. Again, it's such a rich work, but even just looking at it as a whole with a set of metaphors is going to be very interesting. So I hope you can make it. So that's what I had to say. So any thoughts about this quest for metaphors? I know that David, if you have a minute, tell me what you think about these metaphors and this quest.
I'm fascinated. I'm curious. You actually haven't chosen any Shakespeare ever, right?
No, I don't.
I understand, because it's a dramatic. It has a point. And it's seems focused. So yeah, it's something to think about. If I can think of something about it that would be more general. Yeah, but no, great ideas, and I appreciate all your effort and everyone coming. This was great.
Yep,
I-
thank you. Thank you, David. All right, folks, thank you so much and hope to see you soon. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.